All right. I'm Eric Kane.
I'm Paul Tassi.
We're back for the second to last episode of our Game of Thrones podcast. I mean,
Ever.
maybe we'll do another one like after everything's said and done and talk about the whole series or the whole season. I don't know, but probably this is really our second to last ever. Yeah, which sucks.
Yeah, till the prequel series, but it just won't be the same.
It won't be the same. I had this funny idea that maybe they're gonna actually do a sequel series that's gonna be because okay, so here's the problem. Right now we have Daenerys set up as the big bad, right? Which we're not really surprised by this. We talked about that. She has laid waste to King's Landing. In the trailer and the images that they've shared, there's a very large army of Unsullied who apparently come back to life after they're killed or something.
Sure, why not?
She has more Dothraki than I thought, and she's got a dragon who is super powerful compared to what we thought based on the last few episodes. So like, there's really no one who can take down Daenerys at this point, like in a battle. There's just not anybody strong enough. So my idea is that this is the start of a brand new show with Daenerys as the bad guy and Jon as the good guy, and the war plays out over the next few seasons of like the sequel show. Because how can they possibly wrap this up in one episode?
They'll be damned if they're not going to try, and no doubt fail miserably no matter what happens. Because there's two options now. I mean, like you said, like no one's going to win a battle against Daenerys, so they have to like either Daenerys has to win, which would be kind of insane, but also kind of Game of Thrones, or someone has to assassinate Daenerys, whether that's Arya or like Jon getting close to her or something. And like neither of those are good endings at this point, and yet it's really the only two things that can happen. Like I'm probably gonna write about like Saturday or something, but like there's no real way to kind of salvage this at this point, like based on what we've seen so far this season. Like they can maybe make a tolerable ending. Like I'm not expecting that, and like the leak rumbling I'm hearing with no specifics is that people are not terribly amused by the finale. But I just think it's too late, and these seasons have suffered from this time crunch and some questionable decisions, which we can get into. But it's hard to imagine things kind of ending smoothly at this point.
So with people talking about the ending and who sits on the Iron Throne already, has there been a leak, or is this just coming from like somebody within HBO? Like
I don't dive too deeply into like the sources of the leaks. I don't actually want to know the leaks.
Right. I don't either.
So like I heard that like the scripts for pretty much the whole last season leaked a few weeks ago, but and I think they've been proven correctly by the things that have been happening. So I think at least the ending or part of the ending is out there in some capacity, but it is, I will give the internet credit. It is pretty well buried to the point where I think you'd have to really go looking for it. But like just the general sense where it's like, oh, I was on the, Free Folk and they were talking about the spoilers and, oh man, people are mad. And like, that's kind of the extent of it. Yeah. And I heard that about this episode too. And so that's not great.
It's interesting, the reaction to this episode, because I mean, I still will say that I think it was a very good episode that would have been so much better if we'd had a lot more buildup. If we had seen a lot more of Daenerys kind of getting to that point, because there's lots of things that did lead her to this point. I won't even say that she went crazy necessarily, because she has made a calculated decision to rule vis-a-vis fear rather than love, right? We go back to, the prince, and is it better to be loved or feared? And she's decided that it's better to be feared. And so she's just gone all out, like in her own fear of losing the throne to conspirators and to Jon and to everything else. She's kind of just said, okay, I'm going to take the throne by the most terrible means so that no one can possibly question my power and everyone will fear me. I think we did build to this conclusion. The problem is that all the steps we took were so fast compared to how the show moved in the beginning. Like the death of Jorah or a dragon or Missandei in the beginning of this show, any one of those things would have been a big deal that we really explored. Whereas leading up to this this moment at King's Landing, it all just happened so fast. You barely had time to
two
catch your breath.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
It was like she was literally, having joyrides on the dragons with Jon like 2 weeks ago, and then now she's, Westeros Hitler. Like it's jarring.
I mean, she's had things before that indicated her ruthlessness and her, her willingness to commit, murder on a very large scale in order to win. But they were generally people who were
like,
yeah.
This is what I take. This is fundamentally what I take issue with. Whereas, like, I will agree that this was a quote good episode in terms of how it was filmed. It was probably one of the most beautifully filmed episodes in series history.
Absolutely.
I do not even disagree with the conclusion that Daenerys burns King's Landing or like is the bad guy or goes crazy or whatever.
Right.
My specific issue is how it was handled, and I think there was a core difference between. Like, I can see a setup that would have made this somewhat more palatable, at least to me, where the end battle is like this big thing where Cersei actually has a fighting chance and is like fending off her invading army, and like there's this huge battle in the streets between her forces and the Golden Company, and it looks like they're losing, and it looks like they might push them back, and then Dany makes a decision to just burn a path essentially straight to Cersei, or like just burn the Red Keep itself, and then because of that, the whole she burns that, the wildfire catches go off, like the whole city is destroyed. But at least it was in, it was a ruthless pursuit of victory. But the point was like she cares more about victory than she does innocent lives, and like that would have been enough of a breaking point where she just went too far and like for the win and stuff like that. But what happened instead is that they made it. There was the most one-sided battle probably in history. Drogon just destroys all defenses himself, including the Golden Company. The Lannisters surrender, and then instead a conscious decision is made, not even to just like gun it for Cersei and blast it out of the tower, which I also would have accepted as like some thing of her going too far, but to specifically roast like everybody in King's Landing, like men, women, and children, on like just by itself. And to me, that there was a stark difference between Daenerys like going too far for victory and then Daenerys like mass slaughtering civilians when there is literally no actual point. Like you could talk about ruling by fear, but at that point she had decimated the entire city's defenses and their armies with a single dragon. Like that's kind of all the fear you need. So that's where I've drawn the line in my own mind, where that's fundamentally why this didn't work if they were going to make Daenerys, the bad guy.
I think that on a certain level, like somehow she kind of, she had to burn the whole city down, and she had to do it in a way that made us realize that she was, not someone we should be rooting for anymore. I think the problem isn't even necessarily like that she made that conscious decision to go mass slaughter. Like that could have worked still, but I think we just needed so much more time to get there. It shouldn't have been so shocking to so many people. If we'd had her, if we'd spent some time with her conquering other parts of Westeros, and everywhere she went, people hated her and people fought back, and she found herself more and more becoming this, maybe realizing that she was actually not a liberator. She was, they did that a little bit. They did that a little bit, like in Winterfell, where she sees Jon is loved and she's just kind of all alone, and she gets that dark look on her face. But I think if they'd really continue to play with that idea of her getting more and more unstable and more bitter and almost hateful towards the people she's coming to conquer, I think that moment really could have been kind of cool, actually. Like Emilia Clarke did a great job in that moment. I think maybe one of her finest moments, actually, where she just her expressions as she decides to do what she's about to do. I think it was a good moment. It's just like we didn't walk the road to get here. We fast forwarded it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a combination of those two things. I think it's the time. It is hard for me to even with more time to find a situation where this plays out exactly like it did, like without any modifications. Because like I still think there's just too wide of a divide between like the worst thing she's ever done being like burning 2 Tarleys because they wouldn't bend the knee, to like
and maybe that's
15,000 people.
With more time, Well, I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah, I
millions
get what
of
you're
people in
saying.
King's Landing. With more time, we could have seen more of that. I mean, the idea being, and I think I do think this is probably what Martin has planned. Basically, something very similar to this, but he'll get us there, and maybe if he ever gets us anywhere. But you think about the Mad King, her father, and he was a good king for a while, for a long time. Like his madness came on, and his paranoia came on later, and that's with Daenerys, that's what would have to happen. I mean, Viserys, of course, was a terrible person from the beginning, but she wasn't. But she had it in her. Like that's what makes that's what could make her character a really interesting Walter White sort of figure. It's just. And that's why I don't agree with people who are like, not my Daenerys, or like, they can't write a strong female character without making her a psycho murderer. Like all those complaints strike me as very stupid, because obviously there are other strong female characters in Game of Thrones. Like there are several very strong female characters, and none of them have gone and genocided a city. So.
I would say, like, Grant, we're two dudes talking in a podcast, but like I can understand people that have kind of empathized with Daenerys' journey this entire time, because like when you think about her journey, it's been, she was essentially a child when this started. She pulled herself up from nothing. Like she was rebuffed at every turn and had to like grab for every scrap of power she had, and like defy all these guys who were like trying to keep her down and kill her and like all this stuff. And so like I can see how she would have evolved into like kind of a heroic, inspiring figure after 7 years. And like, yeah, there were hints that she was, had the potential for madness or cruelty or whatever, but it was like about her keeping those in check. And then to suddenly have her go like full Emperor Palpatine, like I'm not saying like you can empirically call that wrong, but I guess I understand where people are coming from when they push back using that as a reason. Like, not that it's like inherently sexist, but it is a lot of kind of a big bummer if you have been rooting for Daenerys this entire time, and then she literally becomes like the worst, one of the worst characters in history based on pure body count. And like you even, when you cite like, oh, she went insane, Targaryens, they'll go insane.
I'm not sure she went insane though.
Well, I mean, I guess we'll find out. But like, that's the thing. It's like, even when the Mad King was insane, his idea to burn the city down was like at least tactical, in the sense that he didn't want Robert to have it, and he'd rather have it all blow up and be dead, and so Robert could be king of the ashes. Like that was at least something I could buy. Whereas she won the city like flawlessly, and then decided to destroy it anyway for fear reasons. Like it again, like I don't think there's a clear path you can draw as to like why that, either with her being insane or with her not being insane. It's hard to draw a line to make that work for me.
Well, the Mad King had also done other horrible things prior to his decision to burn down King's Landing. Like he had burned Ned Stark's brother and father alive,
Well, so I mean, they kind of set that up with Daenerys and the Tarleys to some extent.
But that's not quite the same thing. Like Ned's father and brother weren't currently at war with King Aerys yet, right? There wasn't a war until after that happened, and after Rhaegar and Lyanna left. That all happened before Robert's Rebellion. So it set up this conflict. Like the Tarleys were in the middle of a war. It's just it seems very different. I mean, it's similar, but if she'd burned someone a little like an established character, maybe that would have been different. But
Varys.
But Varys betrayed her.
Yeah, he's plotting against her
explicitly. So
it's like I can see what they were going for, and like how this could have worked in some like parallel dimension, but it just didn't. And I mean, this is what I'm talking about Daenerys, but like, I mean, what did you think about the whole Jaime thing? Because I almost thought this was worse. Whereas like we can this is foreshadowing for Daenerys and this and that, but like the Jaime thing really, really bothered me. I don't know if you felt the same way.
I want to say one more thing about the Daenerys thing before we move on, and then we'll talk about Jaime. I think that the big sort of extended metaphors running throughout Game of Thrones have been the threat from the White Walkers, which you can kind of link to climate change, and then the threat from the dragons, which you can link to weapons of mass destruction. And I think at some point in this series, you had to have this moment where the dragon was unleashed as a nuclear bomb, essentially. and the devastation that having that kind of weapon creates. I mean, I think there's a clear allegorical connection between the nuclear bomb and the dragons. And so I think that in some ways this had to happen, because even like a good guy using such a powerful weapon, it becomes a corrupting and devastating influence. And you've got that whole like power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that's where they were trying to take Daenerys' character. And I think it had to go this way. I just think they didn't succeed. So that's all I'll say on that. And I certainly don't think they succeeded in creating the White Walker climate change allegory very well, because winter didn't stick around for long.
Winter came for a little bit and then went away.
Yeah. Winter is coming again.
Yeah.
I promise this time. So anyways, yeah, on to Jaime. Yeah, I mean, I think although far less shocking in scope and consequence, again, and I would say that how the Jaime thing played out was the problem, not necessarily the fact that Jaime went to try to save Cersei, because I could see that happening even with his character arc leading him towards being a good person, because good people do try to help people even when they're not good. Like a good Jaime could still have gone to rescue Cersei and his unborn child in the Red Keep, and they still could have died the same way. The problem was entirely in the fact that how everything went down with Brienne, and how it just how they talked at the end. Like that shouldn't have been the Jaime that went to save Cersei, not the like love struck Jaime. It should have been the good man who came back to be self-sacrificing and help someone who didn't deserve it but did it anyways.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been a much better setup. And like it sucks because like 3 weeks ago we had the nice Jaime knighting moment, and then
so great.
Boop boop teleportation, like he's back at King's Landing. And yeah, I agree. Like if it was more of an unselfish thing, like he was trying to save the city because he thought the battle would destroy it, and if you could just get Cersei to surrender, it would be fine. He could save her, he could save his unborn child, but like there wasn't, like none of that happened. Like he showed up, it was too late. Like the battle was already in progress. He couldn't do anything to stop it. Cersei didn't even need to surrender because it was impossible. Mm-hmm. And then so literally all that he accomplishes is getting Cersei to safety for like 30 seconds, and then they both die anyway because there was no actual escape for them. So it was such like a muddled conclusion to like what had been one of the best arcs of the show. And like I can agree with the point that like I can ultimately see him coming back to save Cersei, but the way he did it and the timeline in which that was done with all this newfound teleporting back and forth, it really irked me.
Well, I mean, just imagine just some very small changes. Like, first of all, I would never have him sleep with Brienne and then just leave, because it's just, the whole thing just is icky. And so he doesn't do that, but he knights her, and they're even closer than ever. And then he hears Sansa talk about Cersei being executed, and he goes to leave, and Brienne says, why are you shouldn't go help her. And he just tells her, something about, how he knows she's beyond redemption, but she's still his sister, and he has to try to get her to surrender and save lives.
He could have told her about the child.
The child, yeah.
That's a perfect excuse.
Anything like that, instead of what he said, would have made this so much more palatable.
Said, I'm evil.
Yeah, I'm bad too.
That's essentially what he literally said.
And then Brienne crying like that. Just none of that worked. But it would have been such an easy scene to make work just fine. And I really would have preferred Jaime to be the one who came to parlay with Cersei at the Wall instead of Tyrion. He's already done his parlaying. He's already done
and that would have made that whole Tyrion scene make more sense, because there was no reason for Cersei not to kill Tyrion there.
Right.
But she wouldn't maybe not have killed. Wouldn't have. Although everyone was laughing about like how when Jaime comes to Cersei and she sees him, she's like, "Oh, you're wounded, you're bleeding." It's like, you just sent someone to assassinate him like a week ago.
I could see her doing that because it's one thing to send someone to kill him. You don't have to do it. It's another thing to see the person. But again, that would have to be more fleshed out, and it wasn't. But certainly having Jaime come to the Wall and say our child and all this stuff, that could have led to some interest.
Yeah, and that could have created a whole thing with Euron, and like the Euron fight was just like the most TV coincidence of TV coincidences. Like, oh, Euron is the only one who survives from his fleet, and oh, he washes up on shore the exact moment Jaime's coming, and like we get this kind of stupid battle that is not.
Yeah, see, that is one thing I will completely agree with. It's same with the Clegane Bowl. Very made for TV. Like here's
I liked Clegane Bowl. It was a little forced, but I wanted it to be like an Arya Hound like duo tag team duel instead of like him just being like, no, you should leave. It's like, man, you came all the way down here with him. You're really just gonna turn around and leave now? I don't know. That was like the least offensive part of the episode, so I won't dwell on it too much. But
yeah. And I liked what they did with Arya after that. I think using her as a vessel for the viewer to kind of travel through the city as it's being destroyed while she's trying to help people unsuccessfully. I think that was very effective cinematically.
And I think they're setting up Arya to kill Daenerys. I mean, it would be kind of crazy to let her kill the Frey and the Night King and Daenerys. Theoretically, that's a whole lot of big kills to give to one person, but.
And then she becomes the queen of Westeros and blah, blah. That would be just... Is
there still a throne? I feel like there's not a throne anymore. I feel like the whole castle collapsed, but maybe not. I don't know.
Well, the vision, we'd have to look back to that vision that she had where there was, the throne room.
Why is everyone saying the vision is gospel?
Because I think it's coming true. I mean, it's coming true like gospel. She did.
If you read the script, it says that it's snow in the throne room, not ash.
No, well...
Maybe I don't think they were planning that far back. That was like in the freaking House of the Undying. I don't think they were planning that far ahead.
Martin was though.
What was
George Martin?
I wonder if Martin had given them the ending at that point.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they might have just done that scene without knowing, but he knew what was. I mean, I guarantee you, he had a good sense of like the major ending plot points by the time.
Yeah, you kind of
started. I'm sure
these big fundamental things.
Yeah, like if you're building towards Daenerys being, this anti-hero / villain, you have to know that ahead of time to some degree. Because he's planning, you've got to plant the seeds of her character's arc. And I think that, again, I think they planted the seeds, but we skipped the whole part with them growing. And whereas we had a great growth, Jaime, this is why this is such a bad death for Jaime. Because Jaime really did grow in a clear and compelling and understandable way throughout this show, throughout the books. And to have that all just tossed away is worse. Whereas Daenerys was not fully... I think her character was never fully developed in the way that Jaime's was.
Well, at least she's been on like kind of a downward spiral, like to a certain extent. Like, there wasn't enough time, and as we said, they could have done more with that. But like, she was on a clear downward spiral, whereas Jaime was at like the peak of his redemption, like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. He was like the best version of himself he's ever been, and then suddenly he's like, just kidding. Like,
what was the point of even having him come to Winterfell?
That's the thing. It's like he didn't do anything tactically in the battle. Like he killed some whites. I guess maybe he saved Brienne once, or Brienne saved him. But like that was literally it. It was like symbolic. It was just like, oh, it's the right thing to do. I gave my word. Until like, whoops, yeah, actually, I forgot you want to kill Cersei, so I need to go back to her. Like, and he wasn't even going back to like defend Cersei. He was just. It's unclear because he never really got to do anything.
He got to ride that horse a lot because.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a long
him waving
way.
his hand around in the crowd. Excuse me. I'm a Lannister. Man. I'm just so sad. Like, it's just there's really. I'm trying to envision like all the possible permutations of this ending now, and there's just none that work very well that I can imagine. Like, not that I'm some master storyteller, but like, man, it is going to be tough to worm their way out of this and make it feel like vaguely satisfying.
Well, it's kind of amazing to me that nobody, read these scripts and was like, wait a minute, we're not getting to where we need to get with these scripts. That's what's surprising to me, because you have such glaring mistakes. I mean, so much of what I didn't like about this episode was because of the episode before. Like, Rhaegal getting killed so easily by the ballista, so easily by Euron. And then in the next episode, it's like, did you see the Reddit post with the patch notes?
Yeah, I did.
It's so funny because they they nerf the ballista, they nerf Euron and the Iron Fleet, and they give a power buff to the dragon and all that. It's funny and it's sad because, well, I mean,
because they dramatically changed so much in such a short period of time.
It's so schizophrenic in a way. I mean, imagine if she'd had 2 dragons going in and like, maybe that's where the other dragons killed. Maybe that tips her over the edge. Maybe she's going to rescue Missandei in the Red Keep and accidentally kills her, or Cersei kills her right then and there, and that's what tips her over the edge in that moment. That moment where there's the straw that breaks the camel's back, instead of it happened last week in this weird anticlimactic way.
Yeah.
Like if she flies to the Red Keep and then she like has to stop because there's Missandei in the Red Keep, and then Cersei like snaps and just cuts her throat or something, and then there's so many ways dramatically that this could work in a more sensible way, in a more emotionally powerful way. But the week before this seemed to just bungle everything. And there was so much room they had 80 minutes. They could have done a lot to sort of develop. I mean, they needed more than that. They needed a whole season rather than.
It really should have been one season for the Night King conflict with incidentally, we're forgetting about this now, but a lot more exploration of the Night King and like his history, or like some secrets having to do with him. Like, I can't believe that we had all that just to have this kind of undead zombie guy who wants to wipe out humanity because he's an undead zombie guy, and that's like, yeah. No, that's crazy. So that should have been a whole season, and then they should have had a whole season about this final conflict,
or
10 episode seasons
that wrapped them both together. I mean, they could have done. I mean, I agree. Like in some sense or another, either one for each conflict, or just more time for each conflict. Either way, yeah. I mean, it is crazy that the Night King. It's crazy that we're not even talking about the Night King or the White Walkers anymore so soon after it's done. Like this season started with no resolution to the Night King or Cersei or Daenerys, and yet here we are with one episode left, and we have to talk about all of these grand conflicts wrapping up.
I think part of the problem with the Night King stuff was like the rule. I mean, this might be a Martin thing too. I don't know if this is in the books yet, but like the MacGuffin rule of like, oh, if you kill the Night King, like the entire army dies, like made the whole conflict just too simplistic, because you knew nothing really mattered until someone was able to get at the Night King, and then once you do get at the Night King, his entire army blows to ashes or ice shards or whatever, and that entire conflict is just over, like done. Like there's no new Night King struggling to take the throne. There's no remnants of the army, like leaderless. Like it literally just evaporates an entire enemy faction in an instant, which is part of the reason it fed into feeling so abrupt and random, is because it was over just like that. It was one knife stab, and it was just the entire series plotline over.
Well, they'd really written themselves into a corner with that one, because at that point that needed to happen, or all of the good guys would be dead, and the final conflict would be Cersei versus the Night King, which would have its own kind of
I wouldn't say no at this point.
I wouldn't say no either, but
based on how things have gone.
Yeah,
I'm okay with it.
And that one of those ballista would have taken the Night King out, no problem. It's like, what is the plan with the Night King for Martin's books? I'm pretty sure,
but there is no Night King, right? That's like the point.
No,
he hasn't introduced him yet.
Okay,
like,
so what's
I
the
don't know.
plan for the White Walkers? I guess I should say.
Yeah,
and I like the idea of the White Walkers without a Night King a lot more, because then they become this elemental force rather than a force of personality. A Dark Lord or whatever.
If that's assuming he had any personality, which he did not.
Well, sure, but I mean, of some sort of will. In the books they feel more like a, something raw and primal. They're like climate change, just an impersonal force coming that you just have no way of stopping. I mean, and yet in the show, I think Daenerys on her dragon was much more the embodiment of that. This sense that this is this elemental force with no rhyme or reason, and we're just completely powerless to do anything about it. And I liked how Jon Snow was just like in the streets of King's Landing, just utterly powerless to do anything and so taken aback. And everyone, Arya, this incredible assassin, is running for her life through the streets, and and there's nothing she can do. And all of that, I think, worked really effectively. But again, it just comes so much out of the blue.
Well, and also, like, knowing that there's not going to be an aftermath to this. It's one episode left. Like, this should be something. This should be a turn where we're dealing with the ramifications of it, like, for another season.
Yeah,
there's one episode. So, like, either she has to kill everyone, or people, like, go into hiding, or she has to die. Like, that's it. That's all that can happen in this one episode, essentially. And
imagine if the go into hiding thing is it's a great notion, right? That Daenerys becomes this tyrant, and then there's a new rebellion born, but it's a rebellion against an imperialist force, a force not of Westerosi knights and stuff, but of an invading army with mythical beasts. I mean,
and then they have to, like, figure out how they're going to kill a dragon,
right?
When they're just, like, some random group of hodgepodge soldiers, exactly. Like, and they don't have ballistas or ice spears, and, like, that could have been a whole storyline in and of itself. Like, cool. How do you kill a dragon? Like, how do you kill a dragon queen? Like,
yeah.
And then instead they're just gonna have Arya sneak up on her, or Jon give her a hug and stab her in the stomach. Riot. Like, it's
I will boycott the show.
You know that's going to happen. One of those two things is almost certainly going to happen.
I don't want it to. I want Drogon to bite her head off or something, or I want her to win. Any of those things would be better than just, like, Jon stabbing her. Arya, of all people, is the last one I want to do that. Arya killed Littlefinger. Also, we forgot that. The Frey, Littlefinger.
Arya's got quite the amount of notches on her belt.
And at a certain point, it gets, I don't want to invoke the Mary Sue word, because I feel like that's brought up by a lot of undesirables. But at a certain point, if you write your character to kill off all of the main villains in a show, then you're sort of asking for that, because it becomes very ridiculous. And it's not that she hasn't had training it's that you can't just have one character kill everyone like this. It's so unrealistic and un-Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it is very weird. I mean, even, already they've given her so many people. At least she didn't kill Cersei. but I was worried she might actually kill Cersei, but now Daenerys is the new Cersei, so that's essentially the same thing anyway.
And if
I don't really know what the point of all that Arya stuff was. Like, if she wasn't gonna kill Daenerys, or at least have some pivotal role in killing Daenerys, like making her the centerpiece of that. Like, and there's no one else to kill except Grey Worm. It's Grey Worm and Daenerys are the only two quote unquote enemy characters left.
Yeah.
In theory, like, I'm assuming that Tyrion's not going to stay on her side, like, obviously, or I can't even think of anyone else that would, like, any named character that would still be on her side at this point.
Yeah.
So it's going to be like Jon versus Grey Worm, and, like, Arya stabbing Daenerys, or I don't know, or they kill the Starks. Who knows?
I would much rather have Daenerys kill Arya than Arya kill Daenerys at this point. Not because I like Daenerys better, but just because it just can't be that predictable and ridiculous. We've fallen so far if that's the outcome. I didn't mind Arya killing. I really didn't like how Littlefinger died at all. That was horrible. But
Littlefinger should still be alive right now and being, like, allying himself with Daenerys, and, like, that's what he should be doing.
He could have been planting a lot of this in her head, like whispering these. He should have been the one to turn in Varys, and he should have been the one to start poisoning her mind like he poisons everybody's mind. I don't know. And Littlefinger could have killed her in the end too, and then he could have sat on the Iron Throne. And you know what would have been really cool is if he sat on the Iron Throne, but, like, stabbed himself on accident, and that's how he died.
Perfect.
So you know that in the actual book, it's
really sharp.
People have happened. A couple, at least one king has died that way already. So
I wanted to see him like someone impale him on the Iron Throne or something.
Yeah,
justice.
There's just so many things that could have been. I wish they'd given us the scripts ahead of time so we could have done some quality control.
And here's the thing, like, everyone's always like, oh, you asshole fans, like, you think you can write something better. It's like, no, I don't, but, like, I also don't agree with this idea that, like, fans can't push back against anything that happens.
Right.
Like, it's not the same thing. And, like, this criticism, like, oh, you just want a happy ending, or you just want your versions of these characters. And, like, there's no way. Like, I would have never predicted or wanted, like, some of the major huge deaths we've seen in the series, but, like, none of them have been, like, as piss poor as the ones we've just seen recently, where like I wouldn't want Ned Stark to die, but like I understand why that happened and like how that was set up and how it was surprising, but it made sense for the story. But like this stuff, either it was badly set up, even if the end result could make sense for the story, or neither, or it doesn't make sense and it wasn't well set up.
Well, the show and the books used to be basically dominoes, an elaborately set up table of dominoes, and you tip one over and it tips other things over. So when Ned Stark dies, so much happens as a consequence of that. When the Red Wedding happens, so much happens as a consequence of that. Joffrey's death, all of these things, they are dominoes and they connect. But what we've seen in later seasons, and the problem is that they don't have enough dominoes to put them all together. So you knock one down, nothing really happens. But then they still knock another one down because why not? They need to knock that one down. And so we get this sort of, it's all a little jarring, like Littlefinger's death. That whole sequence with Littlefinger and Sansa and Arya and Bran, it made no sense for Littlefinger. Why was he doing all of that?
As soon as Littlefinger turned over Sansa to Ramsay, like his character was over. Like that was the thing that made the least amount of sense ever, and it was just
they could have recovered from that, but they just decided to keep flushing him down.
That was a pretty big one, though, and that's something we know the books don't have. So that's right. I'm curious to see how they're going to handle him in particular.
I am too. What else?
I don't know.
Do you have any predictions for next week?
So there's a few like lingering things. Like who do you think Varys sent letters to, and like before he was burned, and will that have any implication? Like you have to imagine everyone else is going to be allied against Daenerys, but again, it doesn't really matter because all these regions don't really have characters in them anymore, like the Vale and Highgarden and Dorne. Like it's tough to even know if that matters at this point, and it feels like it just has to be Daenerys versus Winterfell or the North. Like that's really kind of it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, who could he send a letter to now? Like Sansa, I guess.
Sansa already, but like the letter was that was Jon's secret, so Sansa already knew. I do wonder how Sansa's going to fit into this because like she's someone who's never like stabbed anyone in the face, but she's also been kind of. I mean, she's essentially become the new Littlefinger, but I wonder if there's any amount of like craftiness or whatever that she can actually contribute at this point to make any real difference. Because there's no one to turn against Dany anymore,
right?
Like she's not going to turn Grey Worm against Dany, and that's it. It's Grey Worm and Dany and Drogon. Like, can she whisper in Drogon's ear and convert the dragons?
Yeah, it would be interesting if they made them close. Or something,
A cool blockbuster moment I can see happening is Bran warging into Drogon as like a way of saving them somehow. But that's exactly the kind of moment that I don't think we're going to get at this point, because like they just haven't done stuff like that. Like,
and they don't do any of these. Yeah,
they don't do like big superhero moments like that. Like that's just not a thing they do. And I don't know, maybe that would be lame, but like that's. At least tactically, that's a defense they could have against the dragon, because I don't know what else they can do at this point to actually defend against the dragon. Like they have nothing essentially, so they have to have to assassinate Daenerys up close in person somehow, and she would be stupid if she let anyone remotely near her. But or she wins, or Bran pulls some magic out of his ass, like the end.
Well, at this point, Bran has done very little. I mean, what he's done has been interesting, but it's been a lot less than people were hoping for. And that would be fine, except for that there's just so many of these senses of disappointment. I mean, one of the problems is there's a lot of fan theories that are really interesting, but very rarely has any of them come true. And I'm not like saying that that's inherently bad. Like sometimes these fan theories, I mean, they shouldn't all come true, right? We should be surprised. But sometimes it's also like, wouldn't it be cool if there was something to do with Bran and the Night King that was more, I mean, maybe that they had some different relationship. There's the whole thing about Bran, being the Night King.
And sometimes like you do want like stand up and cheer moments or like shocking revelations and we haven't had any of those in so long now. Like the only one we really had was Jon's true parents, but like everyone knew that already. But like we don't really get moments like that, and everything's just kind of like bad and awful and sad, and you could say that's, quote, very Game of Thrones, but that's not the Game of Thrones that I remember watching for like 4 years or whenever it started getting bad. Like it was good at balancing all this stuff together, and then it stopped.
Yeah, and like you say, I don't think that there's any real way that they're going to make this conclusion satisfying. I mean, certainly not. You're never going to finish something like this big and this culturally impactful and please everybody. But at this point, I think they're really just letting everybody down. I think in season 7, people were annoyed by what we were saying. Like we kept on sort of saying, "Oh, this is..."
Yeah, everyone's like, "Oh, it's fine. You guys are complaining." People seem pretty united about this. Like it's fans and critics. Like I was talking about The Last Jedi earlier, but that was a movie that critics loved, and some contingent of fans hated, and that was a pretty big divide there. But here, I mean, everyone is close to on the same page, and like at best, you have people being like, "Well, that really awful thing was like only half as awful as you think it was," and that's like the best defense people can come up with.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my defense. I would say I probably like this more than a lot of people, and I think it's partly just because I liked, as a standalone episode, the episode quite a lot.
Yeah.
Again, same with the Battle of Winterfell, although I think this one was better. It's just incredible how much talent goes into the production itself. I mean, it's
phenomenal. And that's the problem. It's like I feel so bad because like I'm not trying to disparage the work of the actors or like the people who make all these epic battles and stuff. It's just it's missing something that is making it not come together as a cohesive whole. Like, yes, these are the best battle scenes, like medieval battle scenes I've ever seen, like without a doubt. But like, I couldn't even appreciate this last week because I was just like screaming at my screen about like the idiocy of this Daenerys turn and the way that was executed. Like, I was genuinely mad. Like, my wife was like, "Why are you yelling at the Game of Thrones?" I'm like, I am this mad.
Yeah. But it sucks. I mean, and the music is so good, and just...
Yeah, the music was phenomenal. The scene in the cellar with the Rains of Castamere revamp that they did for that was like beautiful. But I'm like, why is Jaime here? What is happening? This is awful. It's so frustrating. And like I know we're gonna be having the same conversation next week. Like it's just not. I mean, maybe there won't be like a big of a moment like we saw this week, but nothing good is going to save this at this point. It's too late with one episode left, with the decisions that have been made. It's the time has come and gone.
It's interesting to think about Martin's influences here, because it's the whole battle between the Starks and the Lannisters is the War of the Roses in British history. The Lancasters and the I can't think of that. It sounds similar to Stark. But, the war for the English throne that took place after the Plantagenet dynasty fell. And, you go back to the start of the Plantagenets, and that's the invasion of William the Bastard from Normandy, and the Norman invasion that completely changed the landscape of England and Francofied it a lot. And, the Targaryens are the Normans in a lot of ways, and
I don't know enough about history to make these connections, but
so this is all kind of what he's doing. He's recreating this history in a fictional setting, and Daenerys now is like the return of the conqueror, and William the Conqueror did horrible things. He starved huge populations in the north of England, but he ultimately won, and so did the Targaryens, and from the rubble of his conquest grew, the England that we know now, and the language and everything else. And I guess I wouldn't be that surprised if Daenerys also wins, because that's sort of one lesson of history, is that conquerors do win.
This reminds me of the ending for Axel in Twisted Metal 2, where his final cutscene was he gets his wish from Sweet Tooth or whoever is that he gets to rule the world, but he gets there and the Twisted Metal tournament has killed the population of the world, so there's no one left to rule. And he like yells on top of a pile of corpses. Like, I just hope we're heading toward a deeper ending than
Yeah.
the ending of Twisted Metal 2. But
I mean, one
I
would
don't
hope
know.
that, but I don't think it's. I don't think. I just. I don't think that we should just have somebody kill Daenerys either. So
At this point, I would rather probably have her win than be assassinated by Jon or Arya or Sansa or whoever. Like
yeah.
neither of those are good options, honestly. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd have to. It's a hard series to end because like I don't have some immediate answer where like I would know how to end this perfectly. Like because I don't know, and I'm sure my fan fiction would be picked apart by 50 million people too. It's just I know that I don't like how this is going, and I can see that I am not alone in thinking this among critics, among fans. Even if you watch the cast interviews, they're like struggling to talk about the ending because I don't think a lot of them are super thrilled about it either. Like, and it's it's such a bummer.
The other problem with ending a show based on history is that history doesn't end. You know, it when a king conquers another kingdom and takes over completely, you know, eventually, you know, like William the Bastard eventually grew old and fat and died, and he was so fat they couldn't even like fit him in a coffin. It was a, you know, but then, you know, you have the children of the king, and they are often not as great as the king was, or they're crazy, or, you know, and it continues. I mean, that's Westeros is one king after another, and some are good and some are bad. There isn't really an ending. There shouldn't really be an ending to a story like this. That, I mean, there has to be an ending, but it can't. It's not going to be. It shouldn't even be conclusive. I mean, it's a hard, like it's a hard story to end.
Well, this has always been my problem with the whole like, oh well, who's going to end on the Iron Throne? Because like you put anyone on the Iron Throne, the story doesn't end there. Like someone has been on the Iron Throne this whole time. Like 5 different people have, or however many it's been. Like it's just the beginning of a new story. So like, if the whole concept of the Iron Throne still exists, and there aren't like major changes to Westeros to kind of upset the whole idea of it, which I mean maybe that's what's going to happen because they just destroyed the whole capital city. Like it's not a story with a real ending, and I feel like there's a way to do that well and a way to do that poorly, and we are headed toward poorly, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's not Lord of the Rings, right? You don't just get to throw the ring into the into Mountain Doom and then.
Yeah, and I think that's good. Like I didn't want a Lord of the Rings ending. Like that's kind of what Avengers Endgame was, and that was very satisfying. But I also get that that's not very Game of Thrones, so I don't need Jon and Daenerys to marry and like them to build a second Iron Throne and sit on them holding hands. Like it's not, you know, that's not what I'm asking for from the series. But again, there's like a good way to do bad endings that have bad things happen, and then there's what we're seeing. So
you know what was a good ending? Was the ending to Braveheart.
Yeah, and that was history. So
and because it's like, okay, this character has been defeated, but then you know, another person is taking up arms for the fight, and the princess has been impregnated by someone who's not of the, you know, of Edward's line and all this. Sorry, spoilers for Braveheart, but it's been a while.
96.
But you know, and of course that was a bastardization of history, but still very, very good ending that leaves things not completely settled, and it ends on kind of a sad note, but also one of like, all right, we're going to keep fighting. And
this reminds me, like we're going way long. This is like the last 2 episodes, so whatever. What do you think the Azor Ahai prophecy is still like remotely important in what we're seeing here, or like was that just for the Night King conflict, even though it didn't really come up there, or like Jon was brought back to life by the Lord of Light for a reason? Like is that why he's going to end up killing Dany or something? Like, I just in with 1 episode left and them having really not mentioned any of the Azor Ahai stuff in like a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it's been. I'm wondering if that's just something else. They're like, whatever. People forgot about it. We'll let the books deal with it. Or is it
maybe they underestimated the fans and their deep, deep desire to like follow along with all these prophecies and theories, you know? Like,
I mean, those were like like that was one of the core questions of the series was like, does Jon meet the requirements for Azor Ahai? Like, does Dany do it? Is it some secret character we're not expecting? And then it was just gone. Like, I remember your theory that Arya was Azor Ahai after killing the Night king, but like that hasn't really come up. It's
Yeah, I feel like they've just
very
dropped it.
weird.
Maybe the Lord
That's such a
of
big thing
Light.
to drop. Like this is what I mean.
I know, it's so bad. The Lord of Light is actually an evil god, but he was fighting against another evil god, the Night King god or whatever, the Lord of Darkness. But they're both friggin' evil, right? So the Lord of Light got Arya all positioned to kill the Night King so that the Night King wouldn't kill Daenerys, so that Daenerys could be the Lord of Light's evil queen. But they're all evil. So the Azor Ahai is actually an evil prophecy that's just working towards a fiery end rather than an icy.
Like as goofy as that sounds, that's like probably where we're at.
I mean, but that is kind of, I mean, it could work. I mean, it actually could work pretty well. I'm just kind of just throwing it out of nothing, but it could work. It's not like
it could work, but like you know they're not going to mention it. Like I posed that question, but it's kind of rhetorical because like I know they're not going to talk about Azor Ahai or probably even the Lord of Light at all in this finale. Like I just or the cold god or whatever he's called, the death god. Like it's just it's the whole central conflict of the books, and it's not even going to be brought up in this finale. I can already feel it.
You know, I'm fine with like the story not explicitly talking about that stuff too much, just enough to remind us of what's going on, and then we can fill in some of the blanks. But I don't like well, they did, but they didn't do it a lot. I mean, they would tune us back in every now and then, and that's fine. But just to kind of drop all those threads is just very strange. I mean, it would be one thing if it was like, haha, this prophecy is just another bit of nonsense. Like these prophecies are just, you know, crazy religious stuff that doesn't have any bearing on the real world. But that's not what they've done with it either. They've just kind of taken a fuzzy middle ground. And that's another unsatisfying thing about this damn show. So from now on, I'm just going to tell people to watch seasons 1 through 4.
Oh man, we're entering Dexter territory. That's what I do with Dexter. I'm like, just stop after season 3.
Yeah, or even don't even watch Dexter because it's just going to disappoint you. I never finished Dexter, and I don't intend to.
No, you shouldn't. I've been citing this a lot because it's like one of the worst TV finales in the history of time. And
Lost also.
Yeah, although Lost, I think Lost you can debate more, but that's a whole other hour-long podcast.
Yeah, and I'd have to like brush up on it's been a while.
The Leftovers. The Leftovers was a really good ending for a really complicated series, I thought.
I need to finish it. I got into season 3 and I kind of burned out. I just kind of burned out on...
I thought that was just like a really well-handled ending for a really complicated, confusing topic. Where like they didn't answer all the questions, but it was still like satisfying and emotional enough to stay with you and be good. Like that was a very fine ending.
I thought at the
end was only a
Leftovers,
3-season show, but
didn't the Hulk like snap and then everyone came back at the end of the Leftovers?
We could go to a whole thing about Endgame because like I thought Endgame was an example. It's a happy ending, but like it is a really good example of like how to take something that's just this massive, complicated, like impossible behemoth and make it work. Like that they could have easily dropped the ball in so many areas in that, and they didn't. And like part of it was because I guess it was a happy ending and to a certain extent, but like there was sad stuff, and like it was a good balance of like all these years of character development. And like there was no like, oh, Captain America's been evil this whole time, like betrayal, like you know, there was still like unexpected turns, but they weren't like audience enraging turns that made very little sense. And it's interesting that these series are ending like right kind of next to each other when you can just so clearly see the difference between them.
I think in one of the spinoffs for Game of Thrones, Sam goes off on a trip to Europe and has a merry adventure there. I think we should have an Avengers podcast at some point, but probably not at the end of a 54-minute.
Once, which is not enough. So.
It's a long movie though, which makes me not want to see it again.
It is. Yeah, it's just a big chunk of your day. Like I wouldn't mind sitting through it. It's hard to block out like 4.5 hours of movie time for that.
It is really hard, and you know we've got busy schedules, which makes it harder. And then there's John Wick, which I want to see, and
hell yeah,
all that. So.
Very excited for that.
All right, so Sunday, the final episode of Game of Thrones, 80 minutes long.
I guess our expectations are so low now that like maybe it'll be okay.
Yeah,
but that's not a great spot to be in. So
it's just my brain can't even wrap around it. It feels like there's just no humanly possible way for this to not even just to have a satisfying end, but to even wrap up everything.
I don't think so. This is probably my Saturday post where it's just like I don't see how this plane lands.
Yeah, it can't. I mean, even if everything had been really good up to this point and we were in this position, it would still be hard to say how.
Even if we were in this position and there was like another season, like if that was the season finale, I'd be like, okay, this took a turn, but like we'll see how it plays out. But like they're not going to do anything in 80 minutes to resolve this. Like no.
Oh well.
Anyway, on that note, see you next week.
That's our depressing finale. For
what is this? The Walking Dead season 6 podcast or season 7 podcast?
Yeah, right. Thankfully, this actually has good production values because then there was with The Walking Dead, our expectations were lower, but there was nothing we could say nice about it at all.
Yeah, but, this is a very pretty failure.
That sounds like a country song or something.
Yeah.
All right. We'll wrap this up. Thanks for listening.